Hey Shaun, welcome to the Mass Construction Show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So we're out here at Wentworth as part of a leadership series, and Shaun, we reached out to you not because you're claiming to be an expert in leadership. You're someone that I've dealt with over the years, and just through our conversations, I see it myself that you're a leader and you have good leadership qualities, kind of ones that I gravitate to because I tend to like the leader that is not pounding their chest but is a quiet leader and kind of leads by example. And then having spoken to people that you have worked with in the past and currently work with, they let us know that you're a leader. And I had one person say he's the reason that I stayed at Columbia. So that's a pretty strong statement, and that's good enough for me to say that you're really a good person that we should talk to about leadership. So it's a long way of saying we're not here because you're claiming to be an expert.
Absolutely not.
But just that we're here to talk about how you handle leadership at Columbia and maybe in other places in your life. So I thought maybe a good place to start, hoping to kind of understand what informs you. What do you consider a good leader, or what do you look for in someone that you would want to follow?
Yeah, like you said, I think I view leadership different in different scenarios, right? It's kind of like, almost like an a la carte menu, right? Like us, we're not perfect, right? And we have a long way to go. I think the first thing we look for is humility, right? Lack of ego. Certainly at Columbia, we preach kind of a team first mentality, kind of all in it together. But in addition, I think there is a little bit of grit, right? A little bit of, you have to be a good communicator. I do believe active listening is a huge part of being a good leader as well. I think empathy is a big part. I do believe, we are a people first company. I certainly believe that in my heart. And I do believe you need the empathy. I also, again, none of us are perfect in any of these.
And I'm almost not saying what are you, but what do you look for, like when you have that ideal leader?
Yeah.
So you want to see somebody that's empathetic, somebody that listens.
Yeah. So when I'm following, if I'm looking for someone, or if I gravitate towards a leader, I believe being like the emotional intelligence aspect, being kind of socially aware. Like maybe in a room, or if it's a team or a company where someone's struggling and there's a leader that can kind of pick that up. To me, that's a huge quality that I look for and say that this person gets it.
It's kind of saying like the EQ.
Yeah,
side of things.
I think the EQ side of things is a huge part of someone that I gravitate towards. Again, people that I would say I gravitate away from. Again, big ego, chest pumping, about them. It's just not how I grew up. It's not how I was raised, and it's certainly not. I don't think that's the type of leader that people want to follow, right?
Staying with that, so were there people from your childhood or maybe early career that you looked at and kind of that learned from, kind of thought like, hey, that person has traits that I like, and were there people early on, and kind of who were they?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even growing up, my father was he was a machinist, but he had areas where he had to be a leader. He ran our local 500 boys and girls club, right? So the sports, so you can kind of just see little glimpses there. I had some good teachers that took me under their wing. A lot of my coaches growing up. You take the good and you kind of leave the bad. I think you kind of form your own thing. But certainly in my career, I started my career at Turner. I worked for some great people. Again, people that I gravitated towards that just understood, took the time to understand who you are, how are you wired, what drives you a little bit. And we're good teachers and good coaches. I think those are the people that I really gravitated towards, and certainly gave me a boost in my career. And again, you can learn just as much from the people that you don't want to emulate, and I certainly had a few of those as well.
Yeah. Now, were you still having the screamers as supers? when you were starting out?
When I was starting out, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I worked for, and I won't say names.
Yeah. No, I experienced it too. Yeah.
I worked for some of the most notorious screamers and yellers you could think of. But again, I think they were great people. It's just that was the industry in a lot of ways back then. But I think we've, as an industry, have grown a ton to understand you can get a little better results acting a little differently.
Yeah. I mean, did you learn, like, okay, that's I felt like when I was watching that, I would say, and that is not the way to do it. And you could just see, and to me it was almost like puzzling. It got to a point where you could look at the screamers and say, like, can't you see that doesn't work?
Right.
Like in the moment, in the short run, it's very short-term thinking, like, okay, I'm going to scream and cause a commotion, and yeah, we'll get this single task done. But you're not helping yourself in the long run, and you're not gaining respect by doing that.
No, exactly. And I think it's short-term results, and I think I kind of had enough of an opinion base from my sports days, right, where that's a short-term result, right, and you're not going to get the best of your team, the best of your group, the best of whatever you're doing in the long term that way.
Yeah. So, how do you kind of distinguish between, I guess, your management style versus leading, or do you see them as one and the same at all, or?
I guess a lot of similarities. I guess I would break it off a little bit where I guess I view management really more specific to individuals, right? I think leadership, you can get a little bit more broad in my mind. But as far as like a management style, right, like I would kind of consider, again, the type of people I would follow, and where I've tried to emulate, right, is kind of like a democratic / coaching type style, where I like soliciting opinions, getting feedback from the stakeholders, making sure that the team is kind of bought in, right? So sleuthing a lot of feedback. And then coaching, I think, you kind of can relate to the coaching side, where you're looking for people's strengths and weaknesses, and you're trying to help coach up the weaknesses and put them in positions to succeed with their strengths. So that's kind of the management style I try to follow. Not that I'm perfect in it by any means.
And that seems like it's applicable for subcontractors too, right? So
yeah, for sure.
If you put subcontractors in a place where they're going to be successful, then they're really going to support you.
Absolutely.
Right? And
yeah, a big part of that is having honest conversations. And I think that's one trait that I've certainly worked hard on, and I think everyone can work hard on it, is how to have honest conversations and difficult conversations, right? Because going to the subcontractor road, just like we're not a fit for every project, sometimes subcontractors, it's not the right fit for timing or type of project or manpower or whatever, but being able to be honest with that is important.
So kind of understanding, the way I look at it is, I imagine it's a process learning to be a leader, right? You can't read a textbook. You can't go to take classes. You can take classes that can maybe help you be better, but that's part of that process, right? So there's looking at people, there's learning things, there's going to classes. Were there any points along the way where you had kind of aha moments or things where you watched interaction happen? Maybe it was a screamer and you were like, something clicked for you. Were there any moments that kind of helped things click and put you in a certain direction?
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to think back. There was one. I think I tried to. I don't know. I didn't grow up with much, right? I think even at sports, I was shorter, smaller, skinny, right? I had to work hard in a lot of things. So I think my family was kind of that way, right? Very blue collar. And my mother washed dishes at Pizza Hut, right? We barely scraped by. But my sister was a very good role model for me. But taking that to the professional world, I was pretty quiet, right? I didn't talk a lot. I was on the teams I did, sports teams, but when it came to the business side of it, I really just kind of put my head down and worked hard. And I remember when I was at Turner on one co-op, I was still co-oping, and I was put in charge of managing full-time employees. And there was one project where it was very informal. I wasn't technically, but my manager, the superintendent, basically implied, no, you need to oversee these people. And I'm thinking, what does he see in me for that to be the case, but okay, right? So you need to become a little more vocal, a little more, outside of yourself. And then the next co-op, they actually formally put me in charge of full-time hires, which was just kind of an aha moment. Like, maybe they see something in me that maybe I don't see in myself. But again, I think a lot of mistakes along the way. To your point, like, I do believe you can definitely learn to become a better manager, no doubt. And I think a lot of those skills are applicable to the leadership side of things. We have a person in our company right now who was a heads down estimator 13 years ago. Heads down, one of the best estimators in the industry, is now, I would say, one of, if not our best leaders and managers in our company. And that was very much a self-taught process. I think it was always in him, right? But he read books, he found peers, he found mentors. He asked a lot of questions, very inquisitive, super humble, right? Continuous improvement mindset, always trying to do better, all about the team, not himself, right? So I do think you can learn to improve the leadership skills. There's certainly a lot of intangible things that I think are there or not, but.
Yeah. So I guess if I'm playing Dr. Phil here, having your mom wash dishes at Pizza Hut and your dad being the machinist, like, you mentioned you thought a good leader is humble, right? And ability to kind of understand people. Do you think seeing that helps you to, like, kind of have that EQ to understand where people are coming from? Because one person said to me, Shaun actually listens. And I think so much of us, myself included, and probably a lot of folks in the room, we're probably very guilty of not listening like we should. Do you think some of that is the upbringing, and how much of leadership is listening to people?
Yeah, I would definitely attribute a lot of it to the upbringing. But I would say as a leader, 75% is active listening. And it's something I've had to work on. I've read books about, right? Because I think a lot of times in our career, you think you know the answer and you cut people off. There's nothing more demoralizing than letting someone talk and then undermining them and cutting them off and finishing their sentence, right? Some people get that, some don't. But I think you have to listen. Going back to management, like, you have to understand what makes people tick, how they're wired, how they're motivated, what stage of life they're in. Right, because we all go through different stages of life. When your kids are young, maybe you have kids, maybe you don't. Maybe you're motivated by a yoga class at 5 o'clock that is really important to you. Like, you have to understand your people, and that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. But I do believe the best managers that I've certainly worked for and with and around take that time to understand their people and put them in the best positions at that point in time.
How do you struggle, or how do you get through the struggle of, how big is Columbia now?
From 210 people.
Yeah. How do you manage knowing 210 people?
Quite honestly, I can't, right? So I think that's where I'm super lucky to be surrounded by phenomenal people, at the department heads and management level, kind of the senior management level. Because there was a point in time where I think I did, when we were 40, 50, 60 people, I think I did know most people to a point. And as much as I'd love to know every single one of them now, I do know a lot of them, but I really rely on them, and we rely on each other to get to that level, right? So the career development discussions, the work-life balance discussions really need to be the day-to-day management, because I could sit there and preach all day long that this is what we're about, or we're about life satisfaction, but if their direct manager isn't operating that way, then it's all smoke and mirrors. So we really work really hard with the managers to, again, sharpen the tool set a little bit on how to manage, how to listen, how to build trust, right? I mean, to me, one good book is 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and the first principle is you got to get to know your people. You got to trust each other, and there's only one way to do that, and it's not easy. You got to get to know them or her, and it takes time.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a few things, but I guess how would you put your leadership style if you were to describe it? And maybe it's 3 things that you would focus on, or I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no. It's hard. It's a hard question because
Like I hear hard work, and I hear like, okay, that leader should kind of lead by example and put in the work. Honesty, active listening. So listen to your people, know your people, be honest with them, and be willing to do the hard work yourself, right? You can't just sit from the top and
Correct.
tell everybody to do. Would you say, like, does that feel about right for you?
I would like to think so. I mean, to me, I think one of the big qualities that I try to, like, I don't pretend to be perfect. I don't pretend to be the smartest in any given subject. To me, one of the best qualities of a leader is understanding your weaknesses, your own weaknesses and your own gaps. So we try to hire and fill and put people in positions that really fill our gaps and my gaps, right? So if I'm surrounded by some super intelligent people that are really good in their areas, that makes all of us better, including me. So I think I really, and that's kind of how I've looked at Columbia and how we've looked at Columbia is where are the gaps. You know, I think in construction, I'm sure people that, you know, are in the industry understand it. Like a lot of times people look at it such a linear rise to promotions, right? We kind of look at it a little bit different, right? And we've created positions. We created a continuous improvement department because we felt like it was the right time for this, for Siggy Fenley. I'm not sure if you know Siggy.
Yeah,
He's a phenomenal person. You know, just emotional intelligence, you know, galore. But we found that we talked about a lot of good things that we wanted to get done. But when we left the room, right, we all go to do our day jobs, so it's hard to keep things moving. Well, she created her own role. We kind of created it literally sitting and talking, and she was in charge of helping keeping initiatives moving, and getting in the stakeholders involved and making sure the ball kept rolling. But to me, that's like, again, it's tying, like, it's kind of, so one quality of a leader is like connecting dots. You know, you may hear something or like, you know, you think of something, and then you talk to this person and you start to connect pieces and like, you know what, this might make sense, you know? And then you got to figure out the right time, right person, right timing, right?
Yeah, I often found that I worked in places where it wasn't necessarily the person with the highest title or a higher title that was in fact the leader. You know, there would be some person that could be as low as an APM on a particular job site, and that's who everybody went to.
Right.
Because that's who people trusted.
Yep.
And was able to connect dots and could get along with everybody. So, you know, do you think that leadership is absent of title?
I do. Yeah, I don't think the title, honestly, I don't think title matters really at all with the definition of leadership. Some of our best leaders are superintendents. So, you know, we have, again, phenomenal project management staff, you know, younger people, Wentworth grads, right? That are just leaders. You know, someone you'd want to work with, work around, be around. You know, positive energy, not naive, right? I think some people, you know, think positivity is you know, kind of Pollyanna type thing, right? It's really not. To me, you have to have a little bit of grit and patience, right? But if things are going wrong, I think good leaders, things kind of slow down for them. They're a little calmer.
Yep.
Right, where people may be panicking, but that could be any position, any role, right?
Yeah. If I can go back a little bit, because I've heard this from a lot of people. You talked about how, you know, people want paths that are kind of linear, and younger folks that show up, and not even younger, but people at all different points of career, and they want to see their career path. And whether it's project engineer, APM, PM, senior PM, PX, and when am I going to be a PM? When am I going to be a senior PM? If people want that linear path, but that might not be the right path for them, how do you have that discussion? And how do you work through that and get those non-traditional paths like Siggy? And I've done a few different episodes. This is kind of a thing that I really like, as I call them carving your own path. People that are within companies that did not take the, you know, project field engineer, assistant super, didn't take a traditional path, kind of carve their own path, have a little niche. Like, how do you manage that, and how do you communicate with folks if, the path isn't going to be that linear kind of straight line?
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of it is training the managers, right? So we do have a process now at our company, and I credit Shaun who's our Senior Vice President of Operations. We really have kind of a proven process that I believe in, creating SMART goals, roadmaps, right? A lot of, kind of a lot of plus deltas. So we use a lot of lean tools in kind of developing career roadmaps. But it all boils down to honesty. Right, and I think that's where if the manager can't be honest and doesn't feel comfortable saying that, because I think a lot of companies get in trouble with false promises, right? Where you have a manager that just, this person has to be promoted because they're pushing against me, and even though they're not ready. And again, if they're not ready, it's up to that person to convince them that, hey, let's get this right, take the time, and guide them to where they can get to, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know companies that are caving to that, which is we're going to promote because we don't promote, we're going to lose them.
It's hard, right? We have a workforce shortage, right?
Yeah.
I completely agree. If we don't give it to them, someone else might.
Right? Yeah. Are you finding success with honest conversations?
Yeah, I would say we are batting pretty well in that category. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Again, I think it's up to us to convey the 5-year and beyond plan, and that's one thing I learned certainly when I was at Turner. Back then I felt like, even as a co-op or a assistant superintendent, I felt like that they looked out 5-10 years about what your potential might be at that time. So I think it's important for us as leaders and managers to kind of show them, not just even in skill set, but also in compensation. Right, if I'm 25 years old, it's so hard to get ahead these days, right? If I'm 25 years old, trying to buy a house, want to raise a family, I kind of would like to know what I'm going to look like at 30 if I'm on this roadmap, right? So I think a lot of times people hold their cards to their chest, like all about transparency. Like I'm all about transparency, and our managers are there too, where we're not hiding anything. Like if I'm 25 and I'm going to raise a family or go buy a house in the suburbs, I kind of want to know what my future holds. Why not be honest? Right, and if we both live up to our, sometimes things happen, and you can't control circumstances, but as long as it's like qualifications, as long as these things happen and we hold this end of the bargain, this is where we see you. There's nothing wrong with having that conversation.
Yeah, if you do X, we'll do Y.
Yeah,
right.
It's both sides, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny doing what I do. I have the privilege to talk to a lot of people, and I have come across time and time again companies that don't treat their own people well, and what happens is they get to a critical mass, and then the person finds out. I had one person that reached out to me and said, hey, what is the market rate for a person with this title? And I said, it's between this and this. And they're like, okay, wow, that's what I thought, because they spoke to one company and they had been in another company for quite some time, and they were almost like, it was like they were so loyal to that company they were there. I'm struggling for the right word, but they were so like kind of disheartened and disgusted that like they're paying me that much under the market, and I was here and considered myself kind of a lifer,
right? And
that's what the market is.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think most companies aren't honest. They're like, okay, if we can continue to get this person at a good rate, we're going to give them their 3, 4, 5% raise, and they're not going to up to the market.
Right.
So I think, I think if you're willing to have those honest conversations, and I think you're right, if somebody sees that, because you had talked about earlier, knowing where someone is in their life.
Yep.
And yeah, you're 20-something and you have 3 roommates to make rent. 15 grand goes a long way.
Yep.
If you're 58 and your kids are out of school and and your mortgage is paid for,
right.
50 grand, I don't mean it means nothing, but that's not really that important to them. So
yeah, everyone's motivated differently.
Yeah.
Right.
And that goes back to knowing knowing all your people.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, I mean, we certainly pride ourselves, and again, I learned it from Jim, Bruce, and Randy, my three owners that I, learned from and are still on our board. They were always people first, even in down years, right? The Great Recession, 2009, we got bonuses, right? I don't even think they took salaries, right? But they always treated their people first, and that's the principle they instilled in me. Like, the first thing we do at the end of the year is we set aside a large chunk of money for our people and their bonuses, because we take pride in that. And again, we're nothing without them, right? And I think and again, this goes back to the AGC. I think the AGC has done a great job, and obviously Bill Allerud as a chair now, right? But and John Ferrante as president, kind of open sourcing a little more information, right? Not that we all know where everyone gets paid, but we've done a good job with anonymous surveys, making sure we all understand, right, where people should fall, at least generally, and then we can all adjust accordingly based on what company you are, right? We recently committed to making sure that we evaluate every single person in our company twice a year to make sure no one's falling behind. So, there's things you can do, for sure.
Yeah, that's excellent. How about anything with respect to, maybe I might say protecting your people? Like, I consider a good leader someone who, if someone that's working for them has made a mistake, they're willing to take the bullet for that person. And the conversation is going to happen with that person on the side. But, do you feel like that's important as a leader, to be willing to, protect your people? And do you have any thoughts kind of around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, that's another huge quality of a leader, right? I mean, there's a great book, Leaders Eat Last, right? And I think that's a phenomenal philosophy, because I do believe that you could kind of take the bullets when needed, right, but lead from behind when things are good, right? I think we try to, because again, everyone comes from different companies a lot of times at Columbia, right? So a lot of companies you have to self-promote a little bit, right? And you gotta, if you get a win or you finish a project, it's got to be, my name's got to be first, right? That's just not who we are. And I think you promote your people's successes, but if something goes wrong, you step up and take it, right? And I think that's a huge sign of a quality leader that's willing to do that. But I think that it's on us on me and on us as a company to create the culture of a psychological safe environment, right? And that's something we're actually getting ready to dive deeply into the wormhole on. We're actually hiring a consultant to help train ourselves and evaluate, because the number one indicator of a successful company in any business is psychological safety. So if you can create an environment where people are not afraid to make mistakes and not afraid to speak up and say, hey, I did something wrong, or hey, we've discovered an issue. Psychological safety is proven. There's a lot of books. I'm trying to think, the Fearless Organizations one, right? There's a couple others as well. Brene Brown wrote a couple. But basically, psychological safety, if you can instill that in your people and your managers in your company, where everyone, no matter what position they are, can feel free to walk into my office or anyone's office and say, we did something wrong, then that's like the number one indicator. And this it's like a huge wormhole. If you go down it, a rabbit hole.
Well, I was writing it down.
So like they did these tests, I don't know, 15 years ago, where it started to be discovered, right, where they were measuring hospitals. And on face value, right, they found hospitals that had, no reported issues. Everything looks great. Then there's another hospital that had a ton of reported issues and mistakes, right? And when they dug into it, the hospital that reported all these mistakes was actually a much higher performing hospital. But on paper, it looks like this company is, because no one wanted to speak up. So I think that goes back to your point, like making people feel comfortable to make a mistake. And leaders, and all of us, and managers need to make sure we make people feel comfortable.
Yeah. Okay, 2 kind of follow-ups. Having worked at companies that if you didn't self-promote, or frankly, if you didn't kiss ass, you didn't get a promotion. How do you, and I worked at a place where that was the theory, which is like, if you kiss so-and-so's ass, you'll get a promotion. And that's what people were looking at, and that appears to be the case. And there was a bunch of us that were much more of the head down and just do your job. That's what you're paid to do. Just stop wasting time kissing people's ass. Just go get your job done.
Yep.
There was one person in that group that said, I'm going to commit to kissing this person's ass for a year. And sure as shit, a year later, that person got an amazing promotion.
Wow.
And none of the rest of us did.
Wow.
And, it's an N1, but it was a reality. So my question to you is not so much about the kiss ass piece, but how do you make sure that the head down people get recognized? And not recognized as like put up on a pedestal, but that person is performing. They should be compensated.
Yep.
They should be raised. That person walks around and tells everybody about how much stuff they do. How do you? That seems like a challenge. How do you?
Absolutely, and again, I think as you get bigger, right? It's a small company, you have a little more feel, but I think the consistency in your processes and procedures are extremely important. And we have subcommittees working on performance reviews, right? So we've established a pretty good process with performance reviews, multiple check-ins per year that are documented, career roadmap that's documented, SMART goals, specific SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, timely, right?
Mm-hmm.
So making sure everyone is following the same process. Now, again, the challenge becomes if you have different managers who rate differently and different managers who develop differently and coach differently, and that's where we have to know our managers a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone has a little bit of a different style. Is this person getting coached as well as this person's getting coached? But it starts with consistency in the product, right? And making sure that everyone is getting included and having equitable treatment. Right. Again, it's easier said than done, but I think we work really hard, and we have a lot of work to do, and I have a lot of work to do to make sure our managers are managing consistently. But that is my biggest, one of our biggest challenges, to make sure that it's not kind of like the island syndrome, where if you're over here working, you get this great experience, and you're over here, you're getting treated completely different. Like we're working really hard on trying to align the experience, right?
Okay.
Not easy.
Yeah.
Not easy.
Okay. And then back to the psychological safety. It's funny, so
you're going to go down this rabbit hole, I can tell.
Yeah, I am.
I'm telling you.
And I see it, right? So now half of mass construction's business is education for construction companies. Mm-hmm. There are particular construction companies that we will go to, and we have there's probably 30-something classes, but it's the same content being taught at different places.
Yep.
And there are two companies in particular where you will go there and you know that no one will ask a question.
Wow.
And we'll be teaching the same content at other places and everybody's asking questions.
Yep.
And they're talking and we're learning, and my kind of theory on it was that this company, there must be a lot of like backstabbing, and people don't feel safe because it was going to be like, oh, did you hear Joe didn't even know about such and such?
Right.
So no one in the room will ask a question.
Wow.
And I have to imagine that group is not psychologically, they don't feel safe.
No, absolutely. I would agree with you 100%. And I think, so a couple ways you can work on that, right? Like teaching facilitation skills, because I think we might have the opposite problem where everyone's giving opinions and asking questions, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Now we need to make sure we facilitate the meetings and because there's always going to be one or two that are a little more reserved. Mm-hmm. They usually have the best
ideas.
Feedback, right? So having the facilitation skills to make sure one person doesn't, ask every question allotted, right? And making sure you're pulling out from others. And I think that's where you start to, that person feels like, oh, okay, well, I don't have to be the loud, boisterous one to get my opinion heard. And I think that's where you start to create that environment.
Yeah.
And then it's, making sure there's no ramifications to mistakes. Like I make mistakes every day, right? And it's okay, right? As long as we're all learning from it, right? And that's the whole continuous improvement model, is you got to plan, do, check, adjust. And that's by nature you're making mistakes. Otherwise you're batting perfect, which no one is, right?
Yeah.
So the challenge becomes when you start to bring in new people, right? We're growing 5, 6, 7, 8% staff a year, making sure those people understand that. That's kind of the challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're adding to the stable of managers, and then making sure now you have that same struggle.
Yep.
Okay. Now, with self-reflection, I've learned that I like to talk about bigger, broader concepts, but I have people that give me feedback and say that they want detail. Well, how exactly do you do that? What are the steps? Please give me directions.
Yep.
So I am adding in some more questions that are not typical to what I would typically ask. So this one is still a little more broad, but then we'll get much more specific. But how do you think through decisions where you have to balance somebody's career versus the success of a company? Because if you're saying we know our people, and we want to do what's best for them for where they are in their life, and if yoga class at 5 is the most important thing for them, but this is a job that requires 70, 80 hours a week because there's liquidated damages, and that's the reality. How do you square the circle? Or circle the square, whatever the word.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's two-part, right? One is getting back to you have to know your people. And again, I think we have some people in our, like one in particular, right? Senior person would literally do anything. I could ask him, what do you want to do next? Anything the company needs. And I truly believe he believes that. And we kind of look for gaps and what do we really need, and that's he's evolved his role multiple times, right? And I truly believe that. And that fulfills him, helps the company, perfect. Other people, you need multiple or all the parts of the equation to line up, right? So I think if you're going to try to convince someone to do a role that they're not ready for, time in their life's not right, again, that's where the honesty comes in. It's okay, right? Maybe the opportunity is going to be there down the road. Maybe it's not right for now. Let's figure out what is right. Or maybe it's the type of project or the project that you're on. I think being honest with each other is important. But like you said, it is construction, right? There are jobs that are hard, projects that are work weekends sometimes, right? I think we try to do a better job and be more cognizant of people's home situation, right? I was a super, so I always feel like I'm a super at heart. I never forget working the Saturdays and Sundays, right? And coming home, and the only pictures I have of my first son born was the kid sleeping on my chest because I was never awake. I was either working or sleeping. So I get it and I feel that, right? So I think what we've tried to do is create structure and making sure that there's not those jobs with one super, 1 p.m., right? We have assistants now, we have secondary supers, so you can ebb and flow, and you could play off each other, and you could take breaks, and you could take days off, right? And we really try to work really hard to make sure people do take their vacations, right? Because there was a time in our history in Columbia where we were 1 super per job in a lot of cases, right? And it's really hard to take a vacation if you're 1 super. So I think creating structure helps that work-life balance, right? But I think there's another good book, Off Balance, that talks about how work-life balance is, the equation's kind of a myth. It's really work-life satisfaction, and everyone is satisfied differently. There are people, and again, I have a senior manager that absolutely gets fulfillment in his heart by reviewing reports on a Saturday. I can't convince him otherwise. He'll have a cigar in his deck and go through. He loves every second of it. Who am I to take that away from him, right? As long as he knows it's not needed and it's not required, right? But I think conversely, there are people that need, that need breaks, that need different mental breaks, right? So I think that book is phenomenal, helping people work through the mechanics of how to establish your own work-life satisfaction, how to prioritize work, life, family, in all your different core values. So it's a really good book that I would say probably a third, if not half of our company have read. Actually, one read it in one night. He was so into it.
It's called Off Balance?
Off Balance, yeah. I'm horrible with authors. I'm good with book title names, but it's called Off Balance. I could share it with you.
So we have Fearless Organization and Off Balance so far.
Yeah. But that's a good book that actually, because a lot of us are engineers in our industry that like step-by-step instructions on how to get to a solution. That book actually helps you go through those step-by-step instructions.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty helpful.
Okay. Are there any data-based ways that you're making decisions? Because a lot of things so far have felt very EQ, right?
Yep.
Are there database ways that you're making decisions?
Yeah, there are, and I am an engineer, so I do like numbers and spreadsheets and data. I certainly, a lot of it is subjective, but we definitely have a lot of objective ways to incorporate. So what I like to try to do is prove the gut with the objective data. And a lot of lean tools, right? We use choosing by advantage a lot, right? You're getting to...
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so it's a lean tool where choosing by advantage, and you kind of have, use weighted averages based on the importance of things. So if you're deciding on 3 things, right? If say there's 4 or 5 qualities or traits that all 3 are completely equal, you throw those out, and you just work on where the advantages and disadvantages are of a decision, and you can apply that to, whether you're making a major promotion. Or picking, and we just use it for picking a new technology, right? We had 3 major pieces of technology we're evaluating. We used choosing by advantage as we kind of had a gut going in, but we used this long process to kind of prove out what we were doing.
Choosing by advantage.
Yep.
Or choosing by vantage.
Choosing by advantage.
Choosing by advantage.
Yep. We do a lot of plus deltas. We use A3s for strategic plans of sectors and departments. Again, it kind of helps you think through a challenge, right? Helps you establish the current condition, think through what's working, what's not working, kind of identify the gaps, and then identify kind of solutions. So I think we're working, we're using a lot more data and input to help us think through things. Okay.
Anything software related, like Power BI or any of those kind of things?
Yeah, so we just changed into Procore. Right, so Power BI is tied into that. So we're at the infancy of exploring that. There's another piece of software that's kind of equivalent to Power BI. I can't think of the name right now.
Do you know?
There's one built in.
But there's another. Yeah, there's another piece of software. I can't think of the name. But yeah, that's where we're heading. Right.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the dashboards and the reporting. I love picking up trends and identifying trends. So. Kind of the engineering side.
Were there any tools that you used to become a better leader, or not just tools, were there classes you took, public speaking, books you've read? Obviously we talked quite a bit about books.
Yep.
But if there's more, are there steps where, almost like that estimator, were there things that you did that you think helped you along the way?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like, there's 3 parts, right? I think finding a peer that you kind of idolize or look up to or use as a role model that maybe, geez, I don't really know what it is, but let me find that peer. Similar to a mentor, right?
I was going to say mentor/role model.
I think a mentor is a huge thing. And I certainly have used those throughout my career. And even a peer group, right? We're parts of peer groups. I've been parts of peer groups. We've definitely done a lot of leadership training. But I'm a big book person. I drive 45 minutes each way, and I could burn through audio books pretty quickly.
Yeah. Before you do that, though, so I've spoken with quite a few people, and I continue to hear about peer groups from business owners, presidents. How do you find a peer group?
Yep.
Physically, how do you find a peer group? And, do you need to be C-level to be part of a peer group?
Absolutely
if someone's out there listening and, they've heard it too, that there's these peer groups, what would you say to them? What would be a good way to kind of get involved with the peer group to?
Yeah, and again, it's obviously specific to the individual, but so we've done it a couple different ways, right? So we used FMI. They facilitated a peer group for Bruce Gordon, who's our CEO, and then I've jumped into one as well with companies similar around the country. We're not competing with each other, but it's a great learning opportunity. But even, I'll say that's on a company basis. I'm going, but it's company specific, right? I think as far as an individual basis, I rely more on the informal type peer groups. There's companies in this industry that were in Boston that I will chat with, close with a company in Chicago, we'll talk, right? I think what we've tried to do even in our company, right, we have a lot of by example, assistant project managers, right? They can create their own peer group, right? They don't necessarily need to just meet with their project teams or just with their project managers. We're trying to encourage people by position to meet as a group without managers in the room, right? So APMs, go buy yourselves lunch and just go talk. What's working, what's not working, and what we try to do is get those ideas back. If there's themes that you can pick up on that we can work on, bring them our way, and we'll talk through them. So I think encouraging internal peer groups is important. I think the AGC has been a big help. It's so I think they're there. I mean, we're talking about Procore, right? There's a Procore peer group, right? We just kind of jumped in 3-4 months ago. We found there's a Procore peer group in Boston. It's been extremely helpful so far.
Yeah.
People all in it together trying to help. So
okay. So I think you were about to go on to the books before I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, I think to me, leadership, like management, you can sharpen the skills. Emotional Intelligence 2.0 is a great book. That's a good one because it's another tool that goes step by step. You can actually measure your emotional intelligence, and then you can track your progress over time if you stick with it. And I think like social awareness is a huge part of that.
So they think you can take a test to determine your emotional intelligence?
Yeah. Now,
does it seem accurate to you?
I think from what I've seen, the people that have taken it, I think it seems fairly accurate. Now, data in is only, data out's only as good as data in, but I do think, again, the first step of improving anything is identifying something there to improve, right? So I think that type, like that book helps you think through areas that you may struggle in. Active listening is one of them, right? Like how many classes has everyone taken that's, speaking classes?
Yeah.
Well, when's the last active listening class you took, right?
Doesn't exist.
Right? That's what I'm saying. It's like there's such an untapped market, right? But that's the most important skill as a leader. So you could talk through those things, but there's actually some pretty good mechanics of how to actually go about doing it, right?
I would love to take that test. Because I bet you it would be a big ego bruise.
Yeah. Well,
because it's funny, like I feel like I have a pretty low IQ, but I feel like I have a pretty decent EQ. But I would be interested to see what that book says.
Yeah, no, and trust me, it's eye-opening. And again, those are the things I think about at night. There's a lot of things I'm big about self-improvement. I have a lot of things to work on. I always have, and I think I always will. So I read a lot of books. I think the books are kind of like the self-help type books, right? And I try to like dabble in the extremes, right? We talked about like a David Goggins, right? Can't Hurt Me, to the Extreme Ownership, Jocko Willink, to the Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last. Like to me, you need to see a little bit of every type of extreme, and then you kind of create your own way.
Yeah. Yeah, and how do you, I find I have information overload sometimes. How do you deal with, if you're reading that many books? I mean, I have the way I think I do it, but like, if you're consuming 27 books, like how do you prevent from just being like, it's all blurs together into this?
Right. It's funny, there's some people that will take notes, diligent notes, and like, this is what I'm going to do. That's not me. Like to me, I'll listen to a book. I'm not taking notes usually, right? And I think I try to take one or two principles from each. Right, we talked about one the other day, right? $1 Trillion Coach was a really good one. Yeah. About the kind of the personal coach that kind of helped guide a lot of the Silicon Valley startup companies and big companies, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple. But one of his key principles was like get the stakeholders in a room and address the most important issue first, no matter how hard it is. And that's just like the one thing I took away from that book, and it's kind of helped in a lot of ways. So I try to just take one or two things from each and consume one at a time.
That EQ one is really interesting to me. Peer groups, I think, like you said, would be great. I think people might struggle to find them. And a mentor or a role model.
Yep.
Those are kind of the ways that you've gone about it.
For sure.
Okay. What would you tell someone that is either put in the position or would like to be a leader themselves?
I would ask a lot of questions, right? And again, if let's say they're not in our company and there's just someone that's reaching out, right?
There's somebody right now that's kind of put in that position or wants to do it. They're 28 years old working we'll stick with Turner. They're working at Turner and they want to be a leader. Yep.
Yeah, I would ask in their definition, just like you're doing me, what's your definition of a leader? Right? Because some people may say, well, I want to be a PX. Well, a title doesn't mean you're a leader. So what do you mean you want to be a leader, right? Start to explore that a little bit. And then, maybe see how inquisitive they are. And again, I would do the same depending on where they're at. maybe I would offer, and I think one thing we've tried to do, and I try to do, is get 360 feedback from my people and all of our people.
Yeah.
I think that's super eye-opening. So I would offer maybe some informal feedback from the people that you've worked with. You know, some qualities around leadership, and see how you're doing with those, so you know what you have to work on. Because I think sometimes we're so close to it, you can't see it in yourself. So I think getting feedback from other people that know you and have worked with you is extremely important.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to pause before I go to the last question. And any of you guys have any questions? Or if you want to think about it, I'll go ahead and ask my last question, and then if there's anything, we'll pass them on to Shaun. Okay. So the last question, I usually tell everybody this beforehand. I didn't tell you this, so you're going to be completely on the spot. But the question is two questions, which is, what do you think we'll see more of, and what do you think we'll see less of in the next 2, 5, 10 years? You don't have to be held, I don't want 3 answers for each one, but and I'm saying you don't have to be so rigid as, one of them, but what do you kind of see in the future? What do you think we're going to see more of in the future, and what do you think we're going to see less of?
Are you talking industry specific?
In the construction industry, yep. And it could be broad, it could be market sector, it could be technology, it could be whatever. But
yeah, I mean, there's the work type thing, right, where I think where we're heading with electrifying everything, I think clearly that's a huge industry specific. I mean, we're building a couple of facilities for battery storage, right? So I think
singing my tune.
Yeah, I think that's everything from
electrification.
Yeah, resiliency, right? I think people want to be less dependent on the grid, right? As well. So I think battery backup and things like that, solar. So I think obviously that side, the tax incentives and the code, as you know, right? Everything's kind of helping push that, right? The funding, infrastructure bills. So I think that's going to be a huge thing. But I'd say on the softer side, right? I think everyone thinks construction is, doesn't evolve, doesn't develop, right? We're behind in technology. I think the technology is going to develop. I think that's going to be there. But I think you can also advance on the softer side. Like we were talking about this, we had a big interview for a project a couple weeks ago, huge project. And to me, you think about it, we're all teams trying to work together. So like the human side of how teams interact, that needs to evolve, right? You think about it, we're going after a $100 million project. We get 45 minutes to sit with the team and they have to make a decision like that. That makes no sense. Instead of spending 3 weeks on a proposal that no one's going to read, how about you spend 2 days doing some team building activities and getting to know the people and see if you actually want to work with these people for 2 years. So to me, the teamwork and team dynamics, because it really is, right? You think about all the jobs you've been on. Jobs succeed or fail because the teams either work well or don't. It's not usually because we can't figure out how to build something, right? So the technology is going to help, and the efficiency, the workforce shortage is a major issue, right? That we have to do things a little differently as we move forward. But to me, a lot of it is how teams and people interact, and we've talked about it. We've gone from the yellers and screamers, to now, right? We're talking. Think about the AGC. What we're talking about. We're talking about DEI, super important. Workforce shortage, getting more people exposed in high schools, right? We're talking about sustainability. We're talking about wellness. Right, mental health of construction workers. Did you think 25 years ago we'd be talking about mental health of construction workers? The motto was suck it up, right? It's a tough industry, suck it up. We're not talking about wellness in our industry. So to me, that's the stuff that I'm excited about, the softer side of it, and which really means people are going to have a better experience in our industry, right? Yeah,
no, you and me both. And it's funny, you think about that model of doing a proposal versus doing team building with somebody, and I could almost see being the contractor, and after spending 20 hours with the owner, you might want to say there's no fucking way in the world I want to work for this person. We're good, right? And I don't think that would be a bad thing. I think it would be a wonderful thing, because how many times have we worked for bad owners that just ruin your life,
right.
And you're just like, oh my God, I would fucking never work with this person again. And if you could have learned that,
right.
What's that worth?
Absolutely,
right?
And both ways, right? Let's figure this stuff out now. Let's get to know each other. Let's figure out if you want to spend the next 2 years with each other.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, right, when you get to a certain point, and I'd like to think we're kind of, Delbrook's in the same, right? We all can build pretty much most projects, right? The difference ends up being which team do you do it with? And what kind of experience do you want? And we all have slightly different experiences, but let us really expose what that is. And that's not, you're not going to read that on a piece of paper. You're not going to get that all. You can pick up on it a little in an hour interview, but you're not going to get it all.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right. Doesn't have to be anything. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Shaun, Columbian specific, do you guys do any in-house training, or do you facilitate a lot of this stuff? Whether that's management or leadership training at all?
Yeah, so we, a little of both. So we went through leadership training for certain groups and certain positions 3.5 years ago, pre-COVID. But we're getting ready to do it again with an external, different external company for like our project executives and sector leaders and senior project managers. So a little bit of both. We did a lot of internal training kind of during COVID, whether it was teamwork, accountability, those type of things. But we do think we need a little bit more refinement on the leadership side overall.
Do you think it was successful?
I think it was,
understanding it needs a little more refinement.
Yeah, I think it was successful, but I think what we've also had a lot of positional changes and managers that are newer. Yeah. So it's kind of time to do it again. Yeah. We're kind of exploring. We haven't picked one yet, but we're kind of exploring different approaches and styles. Just going back to that point, which one will work with us? Which one will mesh with us?
Yeah. Any technical training?
We do technical training. I mean, right now we're like knee deep into the Procore training, right? Because we're getting everyone certified and going that road. But we definitely have a technical component. We've worked really hard to create a central learning program. We used to be a little more disorganized on the training, but Jen Broderick is helping us really centrally collate our training. And
so is she like L&D?
She's head of HR.
Okay.
But she works phenomenal with all the managers to pull things in, make sure timing works, make sure the phasing of it works, and people aren't overloaded.
And when you say like they have an infrastructure there, is it a software that manages it, or is it just like internally she's managing, okay, we want to make sure everybody that's an assistant super has a CSL license, has been through OSHA 10, should have mechanical systems training, whatever, like, is that what it, like, how is that?
Yeah, so Paylocity has a component to help track all those things, and she's really the central coordinator. So she's done a good job. Again, a lot of what we do is try to sleuth our people for feedback on what they want training on or what they feel they need training on. So coming out of performance reviews, we gather all that information, then meet with the managers and kind of hone in on this year, timing, what makes sense, what lines up with the company initiatives, making sure we're all marching in the same direction.
And you said Paylocity?
Paylocity helps track it. It's really more of a tracker and organizer.
Okay. And is that like a payroll software? And it has
that
a
as well, yeah.
Thing?
Yeah, okay. HR, payroll, and learning.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything else?
Yeah, I would, on the building of the teams, do you look into like the Clifton strengths? Have you done any of that yet?
Yeah, so we use predictive index. And we've dove, again, deep down to that wormhole to analyze team dynamics on the predictive index side. So I would say we probably take the approach of we rough out a team first and then make sure it makes sense. And then when the team is assembled and finalized, certainly on the larger jobs especially, we'll sit down and analyze as a group. People's strengths, weaknesses, how to interact with each other, how they like to absorb information, those type of things. So predictive index is the one we use.
Yeah. And now, so predictive index presumably will have you're either a letter or a number, or how does it, whatever it goes.
Yep.
You're then looking at the team like, okay, we have Harry, Sally, Billy, and Sarah. They're all high A's. That's probably not good, or I don't know, high whatever, you know what I'm talking about. For example, like, are you then saying we should probably take Sarah out and put so-and-so in because they'll balance that out?
Potentially, yeah. And certainly at the minimum, make people aware of what each other's predictive index is and how they like to interact, right? I mean, if you have by example, if you have a AD conflict, they call it, right, where you have a tough time making decisions. If you have 3 people that are in charge of project management and none of them can make a decision, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
But I think more than anything, it's awareness. It's awareness, right? Where, people can be, again, that silent person doesn't speak up at the meetings, right? That high A, that could rub the wrong way. Oh, it's just this person's not bought in. They don't know, they're not into it, right? In reality, if you understand, they absorb information differently, right? Maybe they have to think through their thoughts and come back instead of just talk through their thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. That's just a huge part of making sure the team works effectively, right?
Okay, great.
Do you think being a leader in any position is something inherent, or can be done by training?
I think there is a little bit of inherent. I do think it can be learned and sharpened, if that makes sense. But I do believe there has to be something buried deep inside. I kind of do. But again, I was lucky enough to work with some great people that exposed me to different things and put me in opportunities that I didn't think I deserved, quite frankly, right? But I do think they can be refined and learned. It's funny because I came a few years ago when I talked to one of the deans, and he was asking what else Wentworth, right, could teach, and we talked a lot about these soft skills. And I'm not sure if that's happening or not, but that was like where my mind went. There's nothing technical I could really think of. It's more about how to work as a team, right? How to, and again, it sounds like with Oblate, there might be some of these classes they're talking about, right? Asking, how to ask questions, how to be inquisitive. That's great. It's great to hear. But to me, that's what the industry needs, right? In addition to the technical skills, you need the softer side. But I do think it can be, the tools can be sharpened for sure.
Okay.
Good. I'm wondering to ask, what are the qualities of a good leader, I should say? What are the best qualities? Or what makes a good leader to be a good leader?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, and again, everyone gravitates to different type of leaders, but for me specifically, and I could list 20 of them, but I would say if the top traits, humility, I'd say a team-first approach, and that kind of goes with looking out for everyone on the team, right? So kind of the team-first approach, and I think active listening is a huge part of it. I think that's, if you can't listen and you're not perceptive and you're not inquisitive enough about people, I don't know.
Do you have any good tips for active listening?
Think about it. Before you go into a meeting, literally tell yourself, I am going to let people finish their sentence and I'm going to pause and think about what they said. And that's as simple as I could take it, because that's really what I do. It's like, because we're all so passionate about things, right? At least I am. And I know a lot of people are in our industry, right? So you're so anxious, and people are so anxious. And it's just like, so we actually are at the point now, again, go back to the psychological side, we actually kind of, it's funny, two people in our company, I have like almost like code words. If they're starting to cut people off, I'll say a code word. Or if I'm starting to cut people off, we'll like use this little joking code word. We have a little laugh. It's like, yeah, no, point taken, gotcha. It's like, so honestly, it's just thinking about it. But I think that is so important to create that environment where people feel heard. And again, I think the other part of a leader, right, is, and we talk about like a democratic approach and it's sleuthing opinions, which is super important, but you have to be able to make tough decisions. And when your team starts to get large, it's really hard to get 100% buy-in on anything, right? And I think that's just, those are the things that keep me up at night. I could have a 99% win rate and I still worry about that 1%. That's what I lose sleep over, but it's the reality. Sometimes not everyone's going to be satisfied, and you have to be able to understand that.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the other one that I found was a decent tip, and I don't know if it was based on anything, but someone told me it was, to ask somebody a question. So when they're talking about something, ask a clarifying question about what they just said to you.
Yep.
And it does two things. It means that you have to listen to what they're saying if you're going to ask them a question about it. And then it also lets them know that you actually listened to what they said, because most people don't feel like you're really listening to them, and that just creates frustration.
Right.
Right?
It's a great tip, absolutely.
Because you're waiting for them just to take a breath so you can say what you want to say.
Right.
And then the person's thinking, all right, this person didn't hear anything I said.
Right. Yeah, so you ask a question and you kind of repeat back saying, so if I hear you right, you mean this, right? So yeah, clarifying question or statement, absolutely. It's a great tip.
And sometimes it can be as simple as like they're talking about like, oh yeah, something that was green, and you could be like, was it, if it mattered, you could be like you're talking like high vis green, or was it like,
Right.
emerald green?
Right.
Yeah, like, and not to ask unnecessary questions,
Right.
but if that's relevant, like it
Right.
doesn't have to be like some deep philosophical question you're asking. Just listen to them enough to be able to, ask them a question, and don't make up a question.
Right.
But if it's there, I think I found that one
Absolutely.
helpful. Because
Yeah. No, I think it's a great point. As I cut you off.
yeah.
So yeah, I need my safe word. But the other thing, and I know we talked about this yesterday a little bit, but understanding that you can't treat people how you want to be treated, right?
You can't.
Well, you shouldn't expect. You shouldn't just assume
Oh, yes, I get
you
you.
want to be
Yes,
treated like
yes,
how
right.
I would want to be treated, right?
Right,
you
right,
might,
right.
you might want a different approach. You might be motivated differently, right? So I think, as far as management style and leadership style, you have to understand everyone's different, and you can't. And Jim Marsh gave me that tip 15 years ago. Like you can't assume everyone is you.
Yes.
It's good advice, and if you think about it, it's extremely true, right?
Yeah, and to clarify, because what we were discussing, because a lot of people would say like, no, wasn't I always taught like treat others how you would want to be treated? And yes, from a respect of, be respectful and be kind and all those things, absolutely. But I think what you're talking about is from a management style.
Right.
Some people might want all the directions written down on how to do something.
Correct.
Other people might be like, just tell me what you want me to do and I'll take care of it. Just stay away from me, right?
Absolutely.
From that perspective, you have to kind of know your people there and,
Correct.
and understand what you're dealing with.
Yep.
Okay. Shaun,
Excellent.
excellent. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for spending quite a lot of time between the phone conversation and conversation here, and I think everybody out here appreciates it, and we'll all spend a little time and chat now.
All right. Appreciate it, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, Shaun.